Hello everyone. Courtesy of our next speaker, we're going to be exploring 2018 and taking a look at the year ahead in education. Taking us on that journey is a powerhouse of a personality, someone who really needs little introduction, if any, but I will do my best. Many of you will already know Anne as the editor and digital publisher of TES, the weekly magazine for educators often referred to as the Teacher's Bible. And before that, as editor of the Times Higher Education. I know Anne as someone that I was extremely lucky to work with for the 8 years during my time at TES. In her role as editor, and indeed in everything that she does, Anne is quick to question that which doesn't seem right. She never tires of a challenge, and she champions the underdog whenever and wherever she smells injustice. Her energy is boundless, and she works tirelessly and fearlessly to voice the hopes and fears of the teaching profession every week in TES. And on top of all that, she's incredible fun to work with. In addition to her role at TES, Anne is on the Education Advisory Group of the Sutton Trust, the Advisory Board of the Education Endowment Foundation, and the Advisory Board of the Education Policy Institute. Furthermore, she's also a member of the Princeton University Press European Advisory Board and a trustee of the education charity Shine. Anne is also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. But what's she doing when she's not working? Well, if you look her up in the Who's Who, her recreations are listed as riding hobby horses, swimming against the tide, and sailing too close to the wind. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Ann Mroz.
Well, thank you for that. What a wonderful introduction. I've been asked to say a few words about what developments we can expect in education over the next year or so. Today, as I'm sure you're all aware, is All Souls Day, when Christians traditionally remember the dead. Now, somehow that didn't seem to me the most appropriate metaphor for the future, although the pessimists amongst you will probably disagree with me. But yesterday was All Saints' Day, which is pretty self-explanatory and a lot more upbeat. And if you don't mind, as a good Catholic, or at least I was once, I'll take that as my inspiration. So, which saints do I expect people in education will be turning to for a bit of heavenly support? Now, first up has to be St. Matthew, the patron saint of accountants, because money, or the lack of it, will be at the top of everyone's agenda. And we do have 2 accountants in the Department for Education at the moment, so they should be counting very well. The national funding formula comes into effect in September 2018, and we'll see then to what extent local authorities are actually going to comply with it. Some are already sending preemptive warning notes to schools, telling them that the budgets that they have been told to expect by the Department for Education might not be reflected in their final allocations. And potentially that's a huge area of conflict. The government could still try to push through legislation that would remove local authorities' budget-setting roles, but without a majority that does seem pretty unlikely. But what is likely is that schools will be looking at fairly drastic ways to fill holes in their budgets. So that's redundancies, cutting subjects from the curriculum, and spending a lot less on resources, which I don't think will come as great news for all of you here. Will there be more for the sector in the budget on 22nd of November? As unions have pointed out, the extra money promised to schools this summer is nowhere near enough to reverse the massive cuts they have already had in recent years, so one can only hope. There will be undoubtedly a lot more talk about early years funding in the coming year. It came up at both main party conferences. And a couple of big think tanks are looking into what happens in the early years, and many people have very strong views about it, including me. But whether or not all this noise translates into actual policy decisions is moot. Now, pay. When it comes to pay, it wouldn't be surprising if many teachers turn to St Jude, the patron saint of lost or impossible causes. The School Teachers Review Body, however, is set to finally recommend a rise for teachers in excess of the 1% public sector pay cap. But will the rise be above inflation, let alone at a level to start catching up after 7 years of austerity? The Chancellor might give us some clues in the budget. The STRB has been warning for several years that pay restraint is exacerbating the recruitment crisis, and in September it was finally given the permission by the Treasury to recommend a pay rise above the cap. It's inevitable that it will do so next year, and the DfE will have to accept it, yet schools will probably have to find the money out of their existing budgets, which is not going to be great. Despite this, the recruitment crisis will continue. The DfE's pilot of student loan reimbursement, putting $750 into the pockets of science and MFL teachers in certain LAs, will lack the financial firepower to reverse the teacher shortages. So I don't think there's any doubt of that. Now on to the unions. Sir Martin de Porres, the patron saint of trade unionists. I don't know if you knew that, but clearly he's got a lot of devotees. The unions have had a good year and are likely to keep the pressure on Philip Hammond, but public concern may well have peaked at the last election. And fuelled by the success of the excellent NUT-led Schools Cuts campaign, we can probably expect more grassroots campaigning from the unions in the same style, possibly expanding into other areas such as recruitment. And this will be spearheaded by the new National Education Union, whose influence under the joint leadership of Mary Bowstead and Kevin Courtney will continue to grow. In terms of further union mergers, the most likely one will be between the NEU and the UCU, and both unions have indicated that they are interested in talks in this. And on to politics. Will Justine Greening need the protection of the patron saint of politicians, St Thomas More, or will she suffer his fate, metaphorically speaking? If she does survive a reshuffle, if there is one after the budget, which many people are speculating will happen, there will be a battle for the soul of the DfE, and who will be more influential, the pragmatic evidence-based Greening or free school champion Lord Agnew. If Greening does stay in post, expect more diligent but unglamorous work, especially around social mobility and opportunity areas. And she's right to do all that dull, more pragmatic stuff and trying to put the education system back together again, but without a decent narrative around it, which she doesn't have at the moment, it's unlikely to win her any kudos or plaudits. But after all the upheaval that we've had in the past few years, what we really do need is a bit of boring, which is probably a good thing, as there's not likely to be any big controversial education legislation now the government has lost its majority. So keep an eye out for ministers as they try to find non-legislative ways of pushing through their priorities. Now, will there be a general election in 2018? Well, I don't know, but the fact that Labour is now seriously seen as a potential government means its education policies should start coming under closer scrutiny, including details of its proposed National Education Service. And what would the promise regarding schools that parents and communities empowered via appropriate democratic means to influence change where it is needed actually mean in practice, will actually mean at all? I think we need to look at that a bit deeper. It could have big implications for academies and school autonomy. And the academy system, well, that's going to continue to evolve, but it could do with a little help from St Anthony, the patron saint of lost articles. You may have noticed that quite a few of our academy chains keep losing schools here and there. So will ministers continue to patch up problems as they crop up, or will someone take a fundamental look at the architecture of our school system? The transfer market is only likely to expand, with more schools being transferred from sponsor to sponsor. But will the parents and communities be given a proper say? They're certainly not given that at the moment. And Andrew Adonis, he's going to have a really good new year with a promise of a few more rows about Academy Chief Executive pay as the financial accounts are published. So unless the government's hesitant steps to curb soaring salaries have had an effect, there's going to be some interesting talk there. And let's not forget some of those whopping pay packets like Sir Dan Moynihan and Craig Tunstall, which are at $420,000 and $366,000 a year, respectively, give Vice-Chancellors a good run for their money. Apprenticeships. St John Bosco, the patron saint of apprentices, will certainly be in demand with the announcement of new postgraduate teaching apprenticeships. The school direct salaried route remains in place though, and one has to ask why you would need two almost identical routes. The undergraduate apprenticeship has still not been set up, but there's a lot of talk around it. In some ways it makes sense, as it's more likely to attract new candidates rather than attract people from other routes, but there's much concern around pay and quality of training. However, next year it could make more sense for schools to spend the apprenticeship levy on support roles or learning assistants. Now, assessment. Teachers and students struggling with new exams and assessments could do worse than invoke the memory of St Joseph Cupertino. Joseph, he was a lousy student, but fortunate enough to be asked the one thing he knew anything about in his seminary exam. Admittedly, relying solely on St Joseph may be a high-risk strategy, but nevertheless, the new writing assessments due this summer might make teachers happier. However, the large-scale pilot of times tables tests for Year 4 pupils to prepare for introduction in 2019-2020 will have completely the opposite effect. If the baseline goes ahead, the Key Stage 1 tests will be scrapped. That leaves a big question mark about how to assess infant and junior schools. So the DFE is asking for input at the moment, and that's due to be published in January 2018. And there will be a large-scale pilot of the baseline in 2019. Look out for what is going to happen with the GCSE maths resit policy. The Smith review on maths recommended it be reviewed, and many people have said it should be scrapped altogether because it demotivates students. However, Schools Minister Nick Gibb has said it will remain for 2017-18, but will be monitored and reviewed. Now, even though an expansion of selection is off the cards, the DFE is still likely to put a lot of pressure on grammar schools and independent schools to do more to support other state schools through partnerships. Concerns around Progress 8 still exist. A small number of pupils who sit no GCSEs or hardly any can have a significant impact on a school's P8 score. But the DFE has acknowledged that the measure needs to be adjusted to ensure schools are not judged unfairly, and a solution is hopefully expected soon. Next summer, we'll see the rollout of the majority of the new GCSEs, that's 20 of them, and the second wave of the new A-levels, that's 11 of those. And there was a huge amount of concern this year about just two GCSEs, the maths and English, and there's been a huge problem with the marking as well. So I think we can expect further fallout there. If you think nobody loves an inspector, think again, because they have their champions too, including St Peter of Verona, the patron saint of inquisitors, and doubtless much invoked at Ofsted HQ, where the big issue at the moment is curriculum, and that's where Amanda Spielman is focusing all her energy. The curriculum review that she launched as her big project during her first year in the job will be reporting back at regular intervals. Expect In the next year, lots of references to the importance of a broad and balanced curriculum and not focusing blindly on results to the exclusion of everything else. Plus the inevitable, well, one of the reasons we focus on the results is Ofsted, and that's going to be the response from the teachers. Ofsted is also in the process of drawing up its new framework, but it has been resolutely tight-lipped about this so far. And it is looking to change the law so that inspectors will be able to inspect multi-academy trusts. When and if this happens, it will be quite a significant change in the way that MATs operate at present and the way Ofsted operates, because at present it doesn't have the expertise necessary to go in and start inspecting company accounts and finances, etc. A new Director of Research will take up post in January at Ofsted, and this is part of Amanda Spielman's emphasis on ensuring that all of Ofsted's pronouncements are backed up by solid evidence. Right, faith schools, which soon as I'm mentioning saints, I ought to talk about. Catholics, who, let's face it, probably have an inside track, can call on the services of St. Thomas Aquinas, the patron saint of Catholic schools. And they're hanging on for the review of the Green Paper so they can go ahead and start setting up new schools. They're not so quietly confident that they will get the go-ahead, but they are waiting and waiting and waiting. Meanwhile, Ofsted is very keen to clamp down on illegal faith schools, though given that these schools are largely hidden away, it doesn't seem to have much of a strategy about how to go about it. Now, on to sex and relationship education. There are plenty of saints whose patronage covers relationships, good or bad, but I feel that the extended consultations over what the new compulsory SRE curriculum will actually include may benefit from a nod to St. Godelieve, the patron saint of abusive in-laws, and Saint Gumarus, patron saint of difficult spouses. You can't believe how much fun I had looking up all these saints. I've not heard of some of those. A number of SRE organisations already have their own curriculums that they send out to schools. The expectation is that the government will offer guidance, and the talk is of pillars and not pillows, just in case you misheard, rather than a specific curriculum. Still, sexting, online grooming and internet safety is likely to be very clearly included and will probably be the element that everybody focuses on. There'll also be more discussion about whether making SRE compulsory is the first step towards making PSHE compulsory too. But the general consensus is that arguing this now would just muddy the waters. Once compulsory SRE is established, it'll be easier to push and extend it. And now, mental health, which I'm sure everybody's heard a lot about at the moment. It seems to be the thing that everybody is talking about. And Saint Dymphna is the patron saint of mental health, and undoubtedly much in demand. And we have new mental health first aiders, of course, but CAMS thresholds remain unrealistically high, and pupils with severe mental health problems just aren't being given the treatment that they so desperately need. And the exam regime, unfortunately, is continuing to contribute to general low-level stress. And meanwhile, schools are hoping to counter all of this with fuzzy well-being exercises, which obviously is not going to work. And finally, there's those organisations facing major challenges, and they could do worse than call on Saint Bernardino, the patron saint of public relations. Teach First, which has had its big jamboree at Wembley last week, is going to make a big push on getting leaner under Russell Hobby, so you won't see a big jamboree at Wembley next year. He's going to be stripping out costs to counter claims that Teach First offers poor value for money as a teacher trainer. And the College of Teaching will still have a long way to go, sadly, in achieving its ambition of having a majority of the teaching profession in its membership. That's a very, very difficult hill to climb for them. But I shouldn't go without mentioning the most appropriate saint of all, Saint Daniel, patron saint of courage, fortitude and strength. There has arguably never been a harder time to be a teacher. And teachers will need all of their courage, fortitude and strength to weather the storms that they increasingly have to face. Of course, this audience will no doubt that they will use those characteristics when assessing their spending plans for the coming years. But that's not something I could possibly comment on or endorse. Thank you so much for listening to me. And if you've got any questions, I will attempt to answer them, but don't make them too difficult because it's the end of the day.
Really glad to hear your prediction in the future, the coming year.
Don't tell me what I get wrong next year. Don't send me loads of emails saying you're wrong about this and you're wrong about that.
No, may I please ask a question in the past?
Oh, okay, right. Might be able to do that one.
In the past few hundred years.
Oh, blimey, I'm not that old.
The tools in classrooms, from chalk and blackboard to pen paper to mark pens to whiteboard, now to interactive screens. So obviously the tool has been changed. So who has been leading this innovation? Is it school or government or the industry?
I think it's the industry. I think it's certainly not government, because if Nick Gibb had his way, you'd be going back to blackboard and chalk and those nice lifty-uppy desks. He likes those. So I don't know what you're going to get in the future. I mean, I think he really would love to, and everybody sitting in rows facing the front and very nice and quiet. That's what you're going to get. But I think, yes, it has been the industry. I think from my sort of position, I think that England has been really slow to adapt in the way that America has to a lot of ed tech. But now even America's falling out of love with a bit of all of that as well. Did anyone see the alt school story? No? Oh, you must have a look at it. So this is where Silicon Valley meets education. And it was, I think, Zuckerberg's money and all these techie people going into school, and now they're pulling out because it's not working for them. The only funny thing is just the way they talk about it. So if you have a look at the story, I think it was Bloomberg, it was really, really funny. They obviously just couldn't get to grips with sort of teachers, education and all that. Yeah, it wasn't their thing. Anything else?
How can we get politics out of education and educationalists leading it?
I don't think you ever will. And I don't actually think you ever should, because it's just too important. The worst thing than getting all this attention from politicians is not getting attention from politicians, because you'd just be left to languish. And it really is too important, and so much of the country's future is dependent on it. You'll never get politics out of it, ever. All you can hope for is some good politicians who are going to be leading it, and the ones who will listen to the teaching profession and to listen to educationalists. And I do think you have a bit of hope there, actually, with Justine Greening, who I think is one of the first education secretaries for a while who is trying to work with the profession. Her language is like that, but then she's got Nick Gibb, who only wants to work with this very, very small part of the profession. There's about 5 people, I think, in his little circle, they're just the ones who agree with him. But I think Patrick's got a question for you. You want to disagree with me?
You said Nick Gibb will go back to chalkboards and chalk. Justine Greening is due to announce her EdTech strategy at BET, I think, in January. And I'm just wondering who you think will win out. Is there actually a battle between Nick Gibb and the traditional approach and a more forwards kind of looking education technology approach from Justine Greening? Or do you think they're just chalk and cheese, really? And
They are chalk and cheese. But I suppose hopefully you'd think she'd win because she's the boss, isn't she? You sometimes wonder whether she doesn't actually know what Nick's doing, or she thinks it's just sort of keeping him quiet, you know, let him talk about his knowledge-rich curriculum. It keeps him out of trouble and it keeps him out of my hair. So maybe she thinks that's great, just thinks I can get on with everything else because he's obsessing about these details over in the corner. And that, I think that's the word. I mean, she just is terribly, terribly pragmatic. It makes for a very sort of boring time. She does care quite a lot. She really cares about social mobility. I've had a few chats with her about that, and she really does, to the point where the last time I spoke to her, it was over a glass of wine in the DFE. I've never been given wine in the DFE before, and she was talking about social mobility to the extent that I just turned around and said to her, but you're a Tory, Justine. You know, you sound like a Labour politician. And yeah, she's really quite passionate about it. So I think if she decides to do something, she will. And if she sees that there's a point to it, and I think with educational technology, what she will see is, you know, as a solution to the recruitment crisis, because she is that pragmatic. She thinks, well, how can we sort this out? I can't get enough teachers. So if I can't get enough teachers, how can I use technology to get the teachers to the children, or the learning to the children? So I think she will just carry on, and Nick will just carry on in the corner, although some people are sort of really pushing for him to be the next Education Secretary. So be very, very worried about that one. Although I do like him. He's very nice. I do like him. Well, no. He's terribly passionate about the things he believes in. You know, he's a real conviction politician. And that is good. So, you know, he's not putting it on. He's not doing it just to get to the next job, because he's doing the job that he really wants to do. And that is great. And you have to like that. But I just want him to expand his horizons just a little bit more and to talk to a few more people. That's all. Thank you.